So I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome everyone to today's event. This is the Beaver Watershed Alliance's Forestry Management Workshop. We're very excited for this. This is part of August is Water Quality Month, and we strongly feel forests play an integral role in helping to protect and preserve our water quality and filter stormwater that recharge our aquifers. So we think this is a very relevant and poignant topic for this month. Appreciate you all joining us today. I am Nate Weston. I'm Program Coordinator with the Beaver Watershed Alliance. I am hosting this program and this event. And Carrie Byron is assisting me. She is our Outreach Coordinator. She'll be handling the Facebook Live and Q&A and things like that. If you would, please take a moment to answer the poll questions. They should be open for everyone. If you would, also in the bottom right of your screen, there should be a drop-down menu called All. Depending on what it says, if you would, please change that to All Panelists and Attendees. That way, myself, Carrie, the panelists, and other attendees can see it. So just for a brief description of the Beaver Watershed Alliance, we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We work to, tell you what, this would be a lot easier if I just shared my screen and went to my little presentation, wouldn't it? All right, so our panelists today are Hugh Lumpkin. He's a private lands biologist with the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission. Hugh has been a Marine, I understand it, and a football coach, and did some glade restoration work in Kentucky. He was a biologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and moved back to Arkansas. And he's been a private lands biologist with the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission for the past 4 years. Raven Lawson is a watershed protection manager with Central Arkansas Water. Central Arkansas Water serves roughly 450,000 people in Central Arkansas. Raven has over 15 years of experience in ecology, public education, water quality advocacy. And Central Arkansas Water protects and manages nearly 25,000 acres in the Lake Maumelle and Lake Winona watersheds. Chaz McCoy is with the Nature Conservancy. He works on a variety of projects to improve grassland, forest, and stream habitats. And Chaz has over 13 years experience in habitat improvements. So we have a well-qualified and highly educated cast of panelists with us today. All right, so the Beaver Watershed Alliance's mission is to proactively protect, enhance, and sustain the water quality of Beaver Lake and the integrity of its watershed. And we have a diverse group of stakeholders. We primarily reduce sediment nutrients entering our waterways and lakes, and from which our drinking water is sourced. And this is an essential service to our local communities. Beaver Lake is the primary drinking water source in Northwest Arkansas, supplying clean drinking water to 1 in 6 Arkansans. That's roughly 500,000 people. And in Northwest Arkansas is the 13th fastest growing region in the United States. And protecting this drinking water is fundamental for continuing sustained growth in this region. All right, and just a brief description of this program. So this presentation will basically cover managing forest canopies for wildlife, examples of forest management practices to promote water quality, and some examples of forest management in Central and Northwest Arkansas. And for those of us who are joining a little bit later, I ask again, just please take a moment to answer those poll questions you should see on the right side of your screen. And with that, I'm gonna go ahead and hand this off. So Hugh, I think you're ready to go.
Okay. All right, let me get this slideshow going here. Okay, so as Nate said, I'm a private lands biologist up here for Northwest Arkansas region. I cover 6 counties, including Washington, Benton, Madison, Carroll, Newton, and Boone. And today I'm going to, and primarily my job is working with private landowners that are interested in some type of habitat work, you know, whether it be native grass restoration or timber stand work, which pretty much encompasses everything that we do. So today I'm just going to talk a little bit about the history of fire in the Ozarks and why it's important to wildlife. Okay, so this is the map of Henry Schoolcraft's route. He was an explorer, scientist, adventurer, whatever you want to call him. And he was tasked with, you know, surveying the local fauna, the mountains and Native Americans, etc., back in the early 1800s. And his route, as you can see, came down in through Mountain Home and then went all the way down to Batesville and then back up just west of the Black River. So it pretty much stayed in the Ozarks. You get out here to the Black River and Corning area, and then you get a little bit in the Delta, but it was pretty much mostly in the Ozarks. So in 1818, along that journey, he said a couple of interesting things that will give you a little bit of history of what the Ozarks was like. Is the difficulty of finding wood and water, both of which are indispensable. So basically, he's saying a lot of the Ozarks was, you know, maybe a silvopasture, a native grass prairie, very, you know, sparsely wooded. What you look at the Ozarks today, and it's basically a closed canopy forest all across the Ozarks from east to west. And, you know, so obviously no one would have problems finding wood here today because we got a dense canopy forest going on. So he also said it's a level, woodless, barren, covered with wild grass. So that kind of does make me think, okay, so he's over there around the, you know, the Black River along in the Delta where it's more flat, covered, you know, grass covered. So there's things that he's said there that, you know, maybe he was a little bit in the Delta parts, but then he also said that, you know, talked about the Native American. What's that?
Was my birthday.
Okay. Just a little feedback. Sorry. And so anyways, he talked about how large areas were burned by the Native Americans or lightning, etc. And that's an important topic we're going to cover here in a minute. So with the history of fire, you have during these periods large clear-cut areas. You know, they're, you know, westward expansion, shipping. You know, they're clearing land. You know, the settlers are clearing land. You know, so we did a lot of clear cutting, and that's why we have very little, like 3% of actual mature growth forests left in the United States. Most everything's been cut except for what's on a steep hillside. You had harsh farming practices. It's just kind of like in the Dust Bowl. We overweeded. We produced wheat for years and years and created a Dust Bowl. Well, that's just an example of farming practices that, you know, were done during this time period at some point. And then, of course, early 1900s, the mid 1900s, Smokey Bear was talking about how forest fires are bad, and prevent forest fires and no burning. And, you know, so that has been a big issue that we still deal with. People scared of prescribed burning and burning in general in order to manage habitat. So clear cuts, harsh farming practices, purchase of land by the game and fish, etc. Smokey the Bear. All right. So take home points. Woodless barrens covered with wild grass. All right, we talked about a second ago. Describing dense areas as shrubby oaks, which could be regrowth from continual burning. So lots of burning was done by Native Americans. Lightning storms. There weren't near as many roads, obviously, roads and things like that that are natural fire breaks. And so, you know, burns could get going and go for a good ways. And obviously the woods were more open than they are today. So, it kind of leads to the term bald knob. And that kind of means, you know, areas on ridge tops that nowadays are just covered dense canopy forest. And used to, they would be pretty sparsely, you know, have sparsely treed throughout. And you'd have native grasses and stuff going out there. And it was more of a native tall grass, silvopasture looking prairie type look on top of most of your ridges and stuff. So, and obviously fire was a lot more common on landscape. So, you know, there's a little bit of things to talk to go with on that. And then when you look at the wildlife benefits to prescribed burning and thinning timber, it's just a no-brainer. I mean, I've seen it firsthand in a lot of ways. I mean, I'm a hunting nerd and stuff. You know, I'm hunting and stuff a lot, and I've seen it, how turkeys and stuff react to prescribed burning, things like that. But anyways, so general prescribed burning benefits. Oh, look, I didn't know we had a fire noise there. And so it improves the wildlife habitat by multiple ways. First, wildfire hazard reduction, so you're reducing all the fuels that are from all the dead timber and stuff standing that have fallen around in there. And it improves timber production by thinning the timber, which allows the mature timber to you know, get more water and nutrients from the soil, grow faster, etc. And as far as timber production, you know, timber companies look for straight trees with branches that are really high and things like that. So anyways, so benefits of prescribed burning, maximizes the edge effect. So in places where you have openings and stuff, you have a lot more vegetation and growth and stuff. So you don't just go from you know, here's the trees and then here's the vegetation down here. It's kind of a softer edge effect where you have some brush and some growth, and then you have the openings. That's what the edge is referring to. Stimulates fruit and acorn production, so it does do that. One, primarily by reducing competition in the forest. So all your secondary growth, all your sapling growth and stuff that's coming up and taking up water and nutrients from the soil. Well, now your more mature oak trees are getting that and able to branch out more and produce more acorn production and stuff like that. And of course, fire helps create wildlife openings for, you know, feeding, dust, nesting, etc. You know, it's kind of like when you have a big oak tree in the forest that dies and falls over, and then that produces a hole in the canopy, and then in that hole you got a lot more sunlight and you have more vegetation. Well, and then everything else in the woods is just brown leaf litter, you know. So that's kind of what the openings are doing. And creates browse from hardwood sprouts. A lot of you know, squirrels and stuff eat buds, you know, and deer, they browse on those hardwood buds as those sprouts are coming up. And then you get this, after a burn, you get a lot more regrowth. You get increased diversity of native plants on the floor. You know, you reduce that leaf litter and that cover, and you allow lots of things in the seed bank to sprout out. And then it helps to maintain, prescribed burning helps maintain required habitat conditions for native plants and animals. So if you don't maintain it with fire, and it will just eventually grow up, into a dense canopy forest again. So maintenance burns are required, and helps obviously uncontrolled undesirable vegetation. So prescribed burns are good at taking out those little saplings of things that we're used to dealing with, and brush, autumn olive, or sometimes you can get the blackberries and stuff like that a little bit in a fire. But all the species that you don't want out there, it helps to maintain it so at a controllable level, I guess. Okay, additional benefits. All right, disposal of logging debris. There's what a typical logging stand looks like after they've come through and picked away. But I will say this: I have dealt with some loggers that do a really good job of timber thinning. I've seen one just recently. I thought, man, this looks great. I'm going to recommend this more often to folks looking to work on their timber. Reduction of hazardous fuels. You can see all the fuel on the ground. If you let this dry out, if fire gets going, it'll burn hot. Because usually fires in the woods don't burn all the way up like they are here and get high flame lengths. So usually you're looking at 2 to 4 feet flame lengths in the woods. And then reduce competition with marketable trees. So when does prescribed burning usually occur for wildlife timber production? Well, timing is important. So you have a dormant season burn, which is generally December through March 15th. So when all the leaves are off and all the vegetation looks brown and dead, that becomes your dormant season burns. And this is typically when we burn a lot. A lot of this time frame is considered, fuel reduction burns. You burn off the leaf litter. You burn, if you've done some timber stand improvement, if you've done some thinning, then that's a good time to, burn what's left, maybe some cedars that you laid on the ground and stuff like that. So this is when we generally get most of our burns in. And then you have growing season burns, which are basically not really April 1st. I mean, unless you spray a field with herbicide and kill it, you're not really going to burn anything in April 1st. But that's kind of the season, the growing season. Generally, growing season burns, we look at August, late July, August, September, into October. And then that's pretty much ends your growing season somewhere right in October. And then as far as frequency of how often you should burn, this depends on the objectives of and what you're trying to do with your timber stand or your native grass field or whatever. So it's anywhere from 2 years on a native grass field to 5 years on a timber stand. And you just have to look at the timber stand and say, okay, we need to burn this year. All right. So benefits of timber thinning. And timber thinning goes right along with the prescribed burning. So it's pretty much, they require each other, right? Well, burning doesn't really necessarily require thinning, but thinning requires burning. Here's a timber stand that has definitely been burned and thinned a little bit. It hasn't been thinned a whole lot as far as reducing the canopy if you look up there at the top of the picture, but they've thinned a lot of the sapling regrowth, regeneration stuff that comes up. And you can see how open these woods are. Now, obviously a burn hasn't occurred real recently because there's a lot of leaf litter on the ground, but this is a pretty decent looking stand of timber. It would be really good if this is what I saw all the time when I went out to look at people's forests. It'd be nice, but compare this right here where you can see 100, 150 yards through there and you have some green growth vegetation to this, which is kind of a thick mess. and you can't see 30 yards at 20 yards in there. This needs to be thinned. I'm not sure what so the difference is that compared to the other one, a usable forest versus a not as productive forest. Wait, let me go back. Wait, am I going the wrong way here? Let me see. Okay, so helps maintain healthy forests when you're talking about prescribed burns, along with thinning. It controls tree insects and diseases. So some insects like an emerald ash borer and stuff, southern pine beetle, things like that. If you thin your timber out, they have much less chance of wiping out an entire species of timber, you know, because they obviously you thin it out and you reduce their ability to move from one tree to the next. So that becomes important and enhances appearance. I mean, I like thin timber. I'm a big proponent of thin timber. I think it looks nice, and then when you get the vegetation growing up in there, you produce a lot of vegetation, forage, bedding cover, nesting cover, all that kind of stuff. So, so timber stand improvement is generally done in 3 ways. And here on the left, you have a skid steer, and he's going through and mulching and just mulching up the timber. That's kind of a fast way to do it, but it's a very expensive way to do it. You're looking at $1,000 an acre or something, you know, at least to pay someone to mulch a timber stand. You have chainsaws, hand tools, you know, you can go through and just lay cedars over it and then let them dry out and then try to catch them in a burn next time you burn. And that's one way to, you know, thin the timber stand, especially in, you know, different parts of Carroll County and places, you know, glades and stuff. There's just a lot of cedar coverage, Pea Ridge Military Park, things like that. Just a cedar reduction makes a huge difference. And then in the bottom right is a hack and squirt or injection, where you hack into the tree and you immediately spray some herbicide to kill that tree, and you leave it standing, but then there you go, you're not having a leaf cover, and so you're thinning the timber, or opening the timber to sunlight and vegetation by injecting and killing some of those trees, and then they become kind of a different habitat for wildlife. So I forgot about all the notes here. So opens up the canopy and allows growth in there. So when you do thin, you open the canopy up. That's the whole shebang for this is opening the canopy and allowing sunlight to hit the forest floor. That was what creates the explosion and undergrowth and vegetation and forage and stuff on the ground floor. And of course you do need to burn it off and stuff, like we've talked about the prescribed burning, but opening the canopy, it's just like if you have in your front yard, you have a nice lush lawn out there, and then you have a big oak tree over there, and underneath that oak tree there's really nothing growing underneath that oak tree, just dirt, rock. Well, that's the same thing. It's, you know, it's not getting sunlight, it's shaded all the time, so that's what you're getting. So it creates that grocery store in the woods, lots of new forage and bedding, nesting, fawn raising, turkey nesting, bobwhite use. It's just creates a lot of good new habitat. So you can see on this picture, this side has no management. It's just leaf litter and 100% canopy cover and lots of shade, a few plants on the forest floor. This left side has been thinned, managed, and variety of native plants, and it's you can see through there, and reduced leaf litter, etc. So it's a big difference. So which is better for wildlife and forest health? This picture didn't turn out very good. But here's a before thinning, dense forest, after thinning, more open, And when you thin these timber stands too, they burn a lot better when you get a lot more vegetative growth. They burn a lot better when you get ready to burn them, whether you're doing a growing season burn or a dormant season burn in February. So that's a big selling point on those two. And so you can see how much vegetation is out there, you know, a little bit more sparsely, you know, distance between trees, a lower basal area, and just, you know, plants galore out there. And then native grass for wildlife. So what are native grasses? So generally what we generally talk about and deal with is little blue stem, big blue stem, Indian grass, gamma grass, switchgrass, and a host of others, but those are kind of the main ones. And they're kind of your tall grass prairie grasses. They live a long time. They're drought tolerant because they have such a long root system getting down to the water sources. And they also provide high quality forage for livestock and wildlife, which is whole nother topic. So the roots can grow 8 to 10 feet sometimes and deeper. So that really helps the plant withstand a lot of abuse in the environment. So here's your big blue stem. They have kind of a triple, like a turkey foot at the top, and they grow about 5, 6, 7 feet tall. Little blue stem is more like a 2 or 3 foot tall plant, but they're all bunch grasses, as you can see. Indian grass has that kind of plume of seed heads up there. And then side oats, we don't see side oats as much, but they have the seed heads to one side of the stem there. Switchgrass, eastern gamma grass. Okay. So that's some of your native grasses. So fish and wildlife benefits, native grass provide obviously the nesting habitat for quail, turkey, rabbit, etc. And the big thing is for quail and turkey and all these things is increasing grasshoppers and insects for bugging and foraging. That's a huge key for turkeys right there, which is another subject. But and then fawning, bedding, escape cover for deer. And here's another big one that's kind of goes along with the beaver watershed, prevents soil erosion along streams, helping fish populations. So this is another planting native grass along stream riparian buffers and stream restorations is an important deal, because as you can see, this cover right here definitely holds some soil. So it's an important part of the equation when dealing with stream restoration and stream health. And these are more off the topic, but talking about this is a little bit about herbicide planting of native grasses, how to plant native grasses. I think we can kind of just move on through this because it's kind of out of the forestry deal, but an important part no less. So I'm just going to move through that. And native grass restoration, I will say that it takes a long time to get it going. Try to do at least 5 to 10 acres. Anything less than that, it's really not doing just a whole lot of good. And it can take up to 2 to 3 years just to get the stand established. So this bottom right, that's kind of that's a pretty good first year stand, actually. There's a lot of native grasses in there. Sometimes it looks like a just big weed patch, but anyways. So that's about all I have. So does anyone have any questions? And I'll click off this screen so that I can see or I'll leave that up there if anybody wants email or contact number for a minute.
Hugh, we did have a couple questions you might want to address. Henry asked, his father manages a hardwood forest. It looks like it's a bottomland forest. And he was asking, cutting a bitter pecan for firewood while leaving other species behind. Is this a good idea? What are some other ideas for managing this sort of annually flooding forest?
Say what now? A pecan? What did he say? What was it again? Say that question again for me.
The question is, his father manages their hardwood forest. It's typically flooding hardwood adjoining Taylor Bay. He allows cutting a bitter pecan for firewood while leaving other species behind, and asks if this is a good idea, and what are some other ideas for managing the sort of annually flooding forest?
Well, I tell you, I don't deal with it too much since I'm up here. I know the guys that over in East Arkansas and Southeast Arkansas that have a lot of flooding along the White River and Arkansas River in different places. And especially some of the wildlife management areas that flood for, you know, waterfowl every year. That would probably be a better place to ask. But yeah, I mean, you could, if you're managing a hardwood stand, and I always kind of like tell people, oh, we'll stay away from the white oaks and we'll stay away from the red oaks, and things like that. But as long as you're thinning, you know, it's good. So take some white oak and red oak and, you know, thin the species that are definitely you don't need, like elm and maple and hickory and, you know, cedar, whatever. And then some of your species, like you may have water oaks and bur oaks and, you know, all the species in a flooded timber area. But just keep thinning, just cut here, you know, just open the canopy up. And that's the main thing, is you're not going to hurt the wildlife by taking a few oaks and stuff out of there. And, you know, by thinning the timber is what's helping the wildlife, you know. And if you have a bunch of oaks in one area and they're growing up beside each other, you know, they're taking water and nutrients from each other anyways. You know, get two oaks beside each other, take one of those oaks beside each other, let one oak branch out and produce more acorns and that kind of thing. But as long as you're thinning the canopy and you can see sunlight during the day, you're doing a good thing for the wildlife.
Okay. Well, Hugh, there's a couple other questions in the chat box. If you wouldn't mind answering those, and we'll let Raven go ahead and start her talk.
Okay.
Okay, Nate, can you see my screen?
I can.
Awesome. All right, it's a pleasure to be here today. I guess it's still morning. Again, my name is Raven Lawson. I'm the Watershed Protection Manager at Central Arkansas Water. And what I wanted to point out is you're going to see a lot of the same things that Hugh already talked about, and I would assume you'll see it again when Chaz gets up and talks. But a friend of ours from the Game and Fish Commission, Clint Johnson, one time in a workshop said, you know, hopefully by the end of this, you understand two things, that fire is good and thinning is good, and it doesn't matter which angle you come at it, we're all telling you the same outcomes. So I'm going to come at it from a water quality perspective and why you care for drinking water. So just quick background about Central Arkansas Water. We serve nearly 500,000 Arkansans with water every single day. That's about 1 in 6. We do this from our 2 main reservoirs, Lake Winona that you can see on the screen here, and Lake Maumelle here. That water travels through these raw water pipes to a couple of different treatment areas or treatment plants, and then is distributed throughout this area. Our lakes themselves, just zooming in a little bit, you can see the landscape. You've got the Arkansas River that comes down, the the city of Little Rock over here. Lake Winona is tucked over here in the Ouachita National Forest. That's that green hatched area. And then Lake Maumelle, and the Lake Maumelle watershed is outlined on this purple dotted line. That's our watershed boundary. So inside of that is 88,000 acres of land and water. And all of that inside that purple outline has the potential to influence what is going into that lake. And so it's really a big landscape scale. That's why we look at watersheds instead of just looking at what's immediately on the edges of those lakes. Just to put a picture view on it, this is Lake Winona. You can see very forested, very protected, tucked into the Ouachita National Forest. And then this is Lake Maumelle, a view from Pinnacle Mountain. So if you've ever come to Central Arkansas and hiked up Pinnacle Mountain State Park or saw it from Interstate I-430, that's what you're overlooking. You're overlooking Lake Maumelle to your west. So I was asked to talk about forest management today, and I really wanted to come at it from an angle of ecosystem services. So what are all of those things that a forest provide other than the obvious trees and oxygen, right? And I wanted to, throw in a little quote from Pinchot here, just to show that forest management isn't a new idea. It's something that we've been doing for a very long time. And our thoughts and processes have continued to evolve and develop. And a lot of that's based on the different needs that we're talking about today. So whether that be wildlife or drinking water or recreation, all of those have shaped where we are in forest management. So ecosystem services, to really kind of put a better definition on it, come from these 4 areas. So you've got your obvious, your products, your forest products. So you're thinking about the actual wood itself, wood and fiber and medicine products, foods, and then fresh water. Your regulating services, which they help sequester carbon. They also help hold soils in place so we're not getting excess erosion. Pollination services, and then cultural services, which are recreation, hunting, ecotourism, that spiritual connection to the forest, and then our supporting services by cycling nutrients, providing the primary food source for the broader food web, things like that. So each one of us that talk today are going to come at it from a different angle, but we're all pointing back to these ecosystem services. And when we're talking to private landowners, a lot of those services really boil down to, especially in Arkansas, those cultural services. So that recreation, that family hunting ground, that woodland retreat, going out into the woods and enjoying that. And then more and more, we're starting to see private landowners realize that they can still enjoy those things and actually enhance those experiences and maybe sell some wood on the side and make some money to help pay for that land. I'm going to come out to you and tell you that clean water is the most important product of our forest, though I'm sure the other panelists will duke it out with me. But I'm a big proponent for telling you why. As a watershed manager, our forests are really our first line of defense in water filtration. And I'm going to really break that down and show you exactly why and what I mean by that in some slides later. But I wanted to point you to this slide to really show that properly managed line on the very top is really key to creating these healthy forests and sustaining these healthy forests. As Hugh pointed out, our forests have evolved, and with the original message of Smokey telling everyone that wildfires are bad and that suppression of these natural services. So our forests were once regulated by nature. We had lightning strikes that would burn off those fuels. We had flooding and wind events that would help thin those forests. But as we have popped up cities and towns and created a culture of fighting fire and a negative connotation with cutting down trees, we've actually decreased the potential for those forests to be managed by nature. And we've done that so long that it's to a detriment. And so now, as the humans who really put up that blockade around our forest, we are now responsible for managing those lands because we've kept nature from doing it for so long. So that's really what this boils down to. So I wanted to show this map just to show you how important surface water is to drinking water supplies. And so when I show this map a lot of times, especially students are like, well, I don't drink water, so, you know, I don't, what? But I try to tell them, you know, how many times have you used water since you woke up this morning? From the time you woke up to the time you went to school or church or work, what all activities involved water? You know, showers, flushing toilets, washing hands, brushing teeth, making coffee, all of those things are drinking water. And so that just really drives down how essential that service is to our everyday lives. And so I'm going to make that connection that forests are really critical to every time you turn on that tap. And you can see that in certain parts of the US, it's more critical than others. And surface water, specifically, for those of you in Northwest Arkansas, you know, you're talking about Beaver Lake. That's why we're here with the Beaver Watershed Alliance. In Central Arkansas, we're talking about our lakes that serve our customers, Lakes Maumelle and Lakes Winona. So that's actually those waters that you see with your eyes on the surface. We're not really talking about aquifers as much, but forests do play a good role there too. So this map specifically shows how important those forests are to drinking water. And you can see that Arkansas is definitely in this gradient of importance. So keep that in mind. I'm telling you how important these forests are, but we've also got to recognize the potential threats to our forests in order to understand what we're managing for and how we need to do it. Luckily, for probably a large majority of the participants today, I saw a lot from Little Rock and a lot from Northwest Arkansas, wildfire isn't a huge threat, but we see it on the news and we know that it's a threat and it can definitely be devastating to our forest. And so here in a minute, I'll really break down what the difference between wildfire and prescribed fire are. But we definitely want to prevent wildfire. It's definitely a threat. Insects and disease, you hit on this. That's an emerald ash borer up in the top right-hand corner of your screen. Chestnut blight in the bottom. So these are just two examples of some of the things that you hear, you know, buzzwords on what insects and disease that can really devastate a forest look like. Hugh already told you why thinning and burning is important to those things, so I won't spend a lot of time. And then development. Humans coming in and developing in those forested areas really was the catalyst for Central Arkansas Water and why we wanted to take a closer look at our land management and what really needed to be done to protect our resources. And so I show these photos here on the right-hand corner. Those are actually in Central Arkansas. This one down here in the corner is a development at the very edge of the Little Rock city limits. I do believe the Little Rock city limits have expanded, but as of 2012, that was the furthest most development. And then just inside the watershed, which is about right here, is this area, which is the exact same size. So you can definitely tell the difference between what those city expansion and development areas, you know, the difference in what it looked like when it was forested, and then that fragmented forested area that's coming in. And honestly, you know, there's actually quite a bit of trees around this development, but we see a lot different and a lot worse developments that really take those trees out of the equation. So we talked about the threats to the forest, but how does that tie into the drinking water aspect? I told you that development was really the catalyst for us taking a broader look at what it would take to protect our resources. And in 2007, we had a study that basically told us what we already knew, that existing water quality was good, and that definitely if those housing developments that were proposed were to continue to build out at those densities, that our water quality wasn't going to stand up for much longer. But what else this watershed management plan told us is that stopping development alone is not going to protect this resource for 100 years into the future. You've got to really look at all the different aspects and all the different things that are in that watershed, and forests are a big part of that. And so we needed to come in and find out how we could best manage those forested lands to do part of the work for us. And so that's why we protect and manage those forests. We also, from a drinking water perspective, recognize that there's lots of different avenues that we go through in order to make sure that water is as healthy and as safe as possible from when it leaves the lake or the aquifer or wherever it originates to when you turn on that tap. We want to make sure that that is a usable source for everyone. And we can do a lot for making that water healthy, starting on the front end and on the ground, long before it ever gets into the lake even. As soon as it falls out of the sky and the land starts capturing it, we can help account for the health, for the human health component that you'll see later on in the line. And one of the main things that really plays into drinking water specifically is disinfection byproduct formation. Big fancy word saying that all of this dead material on the forest floor, those are decaying carbons. And so the leaves and the sticks and everything on that surface there, as those break down, they have the potential to bind with the chemicals that we use to treat water at the plant and form these disinfection byproducts, which are potentially hazardous to human health. Now, I don't want to scare anybody by saying that, because we do have, as you saw on that previous slide, multiple avenues for taking care of and addressing this potential issue. But I say this to say, what's the harm in trying to take care of it before it's ever a problem? You know, by treating the landscape, we can eliminate a lot of that potential right off the bat. In Arkansas, we like the tagline that a healthy forest equals healthy water. All those tributaries flowing into our lakes are part of the watershed and part of that story. And at Central Arkansas Water, it's all about the customer at the end of the day. And the cleaner and the safer we can keep water on the front end, we can pass that savings on to our customers and have cheaper water bills because we're using less electricity at our plants to run filters, we're using less chemicals to treat the water. We're also saving on filter runtime and media and all of those things that go into cleaning that water. We can reduce those operating costs and pass that savings on. So how do we do it at Central Arkansas Water? Well, it's not just land management, and it's not just balancing development. It takes a lot of different avenues, and these are some of the things that we do on a day-to-day basis. It starts with purchasing those lands, which we're pretty fortunate. Unfortunately, a lot of water utilities don't have the capacity or the ability to do that because of the current ownership of the lakes and the lands around them. So that is unique to us. We do education and outreach. We also do emergency response and mitigation monitoring, all of these different aspects. But really, we're going to hit again on the forest management side, because we do own those lands. And so it's our responsibility as those landowners to manage those. We don't want a giant wildfire to break out along the edges of our source water or right on the edge of the city of Little Rock. So we're gonna be good stewards of the land, and we're gonna do that in a couple of ways. So we do that from prescribed fire and ecological thinning, just as Hugh had mentioned earlier. But our number one reason for managing the forest is that reduction of that total organic carbon. Like I said, to prevent the formation of those disinfection byproducts down the line. Second, we want to increase water quality filtration on the landscape. So they're our first line of defense. They're our first filter in water quality and the treatment of the water. But we can't forget about those other services that we're providing by doing that on the landscape and being good stewards. We're obviously getting that reduction of wildfire risk. We're also increasing that wildlife habitat and that plant and animal diversity, and we're producing healthier and more resilient forests. And to put those in different colors, because that's really what anyone who's not in the drinking water watershed really are probably focusing on, but they all play in this game. Hugh had a similar slide that just shows you the difference between your lawn species of grasses and your native grasses and plants, and it really boils down to this root system. You can go out to your lawn and pluck up some grass today, and you'll find that the root system is, you know, an inch at best in most cases. But our native plants, if you look at that scale on the left-hand side, you're looking at, you know, 3 to 15 feet, an average of 6 feet. So the native plant root system is actually deeper in the ground than I am tall. And so that provides a lot of services to us. It holds soils in place so that we don't have mass sedimentation and erosion and movement of soils across the landscape, filling up our reservoir, taking historic metals and different contaminants and nutrients with it. So it's holding it in place. But those native plants also have the ability to uptake a lot of pollutants through their root systems, and non-native plants don't have that ability. So they can actually convert a lot of things that run off the landscape and use them to grow. When I talk about how we manage our forest, and I said that I think Nate said in the beginning that we own upwards of 25,000 acres of land and water resources, it's not one fell swoop. We do this in tiny chunks, and we do it very prescriptive. So that's why I use the term prescribed fire. So say, you know, we've got these units that are between 50 acres and close to 400 acres, and they're based on the forest stand. And we do different management practices on a number of ways, for a number of reasons. If we want to put fire on the ground, we're looking at which direction the wind's going to blow. We're going to look at what species are there, what the understory looks like, what the use of that land is. You know, we've got, you don't see it on this map, but Highway 10, which is a major thoroughfare heading out of Little Rock and into western Pulaski County, runs right through here, and we can't smoke out the roads. We can't smoke out the city of Maumelle over here. So these units on the south side, we want to make sure that wind's blowing this direction when we burn. These units on the north side, we want to make sure that the wind's blowing this direction when we burn. So I say that to say prescribed fire has a lot of depth to it and a lot of different moving pieces. And it's just like if you are sick and you go to the doctor and you don't just say, I want you to write me a prescription for this. No, they ask a bunch of questions and they get down to the root of the problem, and then they prescribe you exactly what they believe will lead to better health for you. And that's exactly what we do on the forest, and it's in little tiny chunks. So again, I won't talk a lot about burning. You did that, but I do want you to know that we kind of do a burn, thin burn in order to increase that health of the forest. Prescribed burns are low, controlled. All of those elements go into place to make sure that fire stays low on the forest floor and creeps across, really just burning that organic layer off and putting those nutrients back into the soil so that our native plants can grow back up. It doesn't really climb trees. That's a wildfire when it climbs trees and gets into the ground and kills off the forest. Really what we're doing is we're just taking care of understory dead things for the most part. It does look pretty devastating right immediately after a burn. Looks something like this. But if you just hold your breath and wait like 3 months, it looks like this. This is in the same spot. Can't even walk out to those trees. So it regenerates really quickly. You'll see this tree in the next photo, again, just a kind of a before and after. But that's really still not our goal. So when I talk about thinning and cutting trees, it's going to be no surprise to those of you who were watching Hugh's talk, but we're not talking about a clear cut. We're not talking about taking all the trees off the landscape. I really like the terms ecological thinning and prescriptive thinning. Harvest is the same. And if you're talking to a forester, they're probably going to say, we should do a harvest, but you shouldn't be scared of that word. You should really ask what they mean by that, because it's probably not this when you're talking about private lands. Again, this is clearly a clear cut, not a thinning. So again, overgrown forests are riddled with threats. They have closed canopies, and you can see that there's nothing growing on the floor here. They're dark and enclosed. I'll go through this a little quicker than normal because I believe that Hugh did a really good job of kind of explaining that. Thinning, again, just like fire, looks pretty devastating. There's big machines, it's really loud, things get muddy and things get dirty. But really what we're doing, I'm gonna go back a slide, is we're going in and we're saying, you know, we don't really need this pine tree, and we don't really need that little oak. It's kind of crooked and it's not growing. So we're going in and we're picking out very specific trees in order to give the ones that are healthier more resources, more light, more water, more nutrients in order to grow bigger and healthier. And so we're going in and just selecting very specific trees out of the landscape. Again, starting to look pretty good. If you were to drive by this, other than the fact that there's nothing on the floor yet, because this is immediately after a thin, you'd think there's a forest. You wouldn't think there is something devastating happening here. No, it looks like a forest, and it's going to continue to look good and look like a forest. So just again, some befores and afters. We started with that dark, thick, dense canopy. We opened it up to all of those resources that plants need to grow. And eventually we get to something like this. Now these trees are thin, or they're small, because this was such an overgrown area that we treated that we are kind of starting a forest from scratch. All those trees were there and all those species were there, but they were over competing, really closed in. And so, but this is looking really good. You can see the light in the canopy coming to the forest floor and giving that sunlight to all these understory plants. Some areas look like this. You've got lots of native wildflower species. This is actually the exact same unit, and it's about a 10-minute walk straight uphill from that previous picture to this one, and they were taken on the same day in June. Just to show you the difference in the habitat and the diversity that you can create in a very small area. Overall, this is what we're going for. We're going from a forest that looks like this. We're going to do some burn treatments on it. We're going to do some thinning treatments on it and get it looking good. And we're going to keep that up until it looks like this and has all of those little root systems and all those extra filters on the forest floor doing that first filtration for us. And that's where I'm going to wrap it up. We have a lot of ground to cover and a very small staff. And we rely really heavily on folks from all of these organizations to help us meet our goals on a day-to-day basis. And so I like to give them props at the end. And I'll take some questions.
Yeah, if you would just please put any questions you might have in the Q&A box. Myself or any of the panelists would be quite happy to answer them. We'd be happy to nerd out over ecology or prescribed fires as much as we could. I'm going to take this opportunity to just hand this over to Chaz.
Thank you.
How's that? You go through a series of clicks there. All right, well, thanks. Some hard acts to follow with my co-panelists there already, but they did a great job of highlighting some of these forest management activities and going through the details of why they're important. So I'll try not to be too redundant in my talk. So again, I'm Chaz McCoy. I'm watershed specialist for the Nature Conservancy in Arkansas. In my role as watershed specialist, I work on a variety of land management projects that include stream and riparian enhancement projects, grassland enhancement, and forest management, as we will discuss today. But first off, I just want to mention, the Nature Conservancy is a global environmental nonprofit working to create a world where people and nature thrive. So in TNC, which I'll refer to the Nature Conservancy, it's TNC for brevity. TNC impacts conservation in 79 countries now and includes all 50 US states. So since 1982, the Nature Conservancy has been active in Arkansas, working proactively with private landowners, businesses, public agencies, and other organizations to conserve the lands and water in our natural state for people to enjoy. So I'm going to talk about forest management activities that were used to improve habitat at the Robb and Melanie Walton Preserve. The Walton Preserve is part of a larger conservation complex at Devil's Eyebrow that consists of diverse plant communities and a variety of different habitats, including high quality glades, woodlands, upland forests, and riparian forests. So looking at the map here, you see Devil's Eyebrow Natural Area that's co-managed by Arkansas Game and Fish Commission and Arkansas Natural Heritage Commission. And it includes over 3,000 acres there at Devil's Eyebrow. And there's over 530 different species of plants that have been documented. And then the Robb and Melanie Walton Preserve, you can see there to the south in pink, that is comprised of over 410 acres and has 250 species of plants documented there. So very species rich areas in terms of plants. So a lot of what I'll talk about today kind of is in terms of plant communities, but also benefits a whole host of wildlife species. And then just for context, you can see Garfield here in Northwest Arkansas. This is Highway 62 going up to Gateview. So this is situated in Northwest Arkansas. And here is Indian Creek flowing into Beaver Lake right there as well. So these activities that I'll discuss, we implemented at the Walton Preserve to improve habitat conditions there and are also fundamental to forest management, as you've already heard pretty much all of these activities described previously. And so how they were situated at the Walton Preserve, we've got red cedar thinning that took place in various locations across the 400 acres of the preserve where we had dense stands of red cedar that needed to be thinned out. And I'll talk more about that. Prescribed fire took place in this basically lower half of the preserve here. It included close to 200 acres of forested area. We did herbicide injection, which you've also heard as hack and squirt, on about 60 acres that's shaded there in purple. We have a network of unpaved roads going throughout the preserve that were there when the Nature Conservancy acquired the property. So we worked on improving unpaved roads throughout this network but there's a specific area here at the red star that I will highlight in my slides. And then we also work to improve edge and adjacent habitat, like Hugh had mentioned earlier. And there's about, well, we did a burn on about 25 acres up here, and there's about 10 acres where we concentrated on treating invasive species and improving grassland habitat. I'll go into more details on those. So management activity started with red cedar thinning. Now, I'd just like to mention that red cedar, eastern red cedar, are native to Arkansas and most of the eastern half of the US. So they're not technically invasive by definition. An invasive species is one that's both non-native and causes ecologic and or economic harm. So just wanted to, that's kind of a soapbox moment, but they're technically not invasive. However, they can take over habitats, especially where fire is suppressed and areas that aren't being actively managed, which you can see in the photo here. There's a very dense stand of red cedar, and there's not much else going on in the understory there as far as plant diversity. So where fire is suppressed and the land isn't actively managed, red cedar will form dense stands such as that pictured, and will reduce sunlight to the understory and significantly reduce plant diversity. So red cedar are not fire tolerant. So if regular fire moves through the landscape, it'll keep the red cedar in check. However, once a dense stand like this pictured is formed or becomes established, it can't be taken care of with just fire alone. So other management activities will need to be implemented to help kind of recover that area. So this area photographed here is actually a glade, so that should be open habitat covered with grasses and forbs, maybe some woody species, trees sporadically throughout the landscape, but not densely vegetated or not have a dense canopy like it does in that picture. So if fire management is part of, or if prescribed fire is part of your overall management plan for the area, you definitely want to consider how you conduct your cedar thinning so that it's complementary to your fire activities. For example, if you go through an area that's mixed dense stands of red cedar and mature forest, and you cut and lay all those red cedars in there and then go through and burn it, you'll probably have a intense fire such that it burns up a lot of your mature trees. So just be aware of that. If you work with an agency or you hire somebody to do fire or you're able to do it yourself, those are definitely considerations you want to take in mind. So alternatively, you can cut and pile cedars and kind of keep them in a contained area where you can keep the fire from spreading out beyond a pile. That'll also help with the intensity of the fire too, so you're not getting a lot of collateral damage to your forest. And I'll mention, well, you can see in the picture, in some cases you can also go through and girdle the cedar, especially these larger ones. In this particular cedar thinning, we went through and girdled the red cedar, so that'll kill the top half. I've not found them to resprout, so that's effective. Sometimes if you don't get the girdling deep enough or wide enough, the tree can somehow find a way to survive through there. So ensure that your girdling is deep and all the way around the tree. And herbicide injection also works, that we'll get into shortly. So prescribed fire, as it's been talked about a lot already, so I won't get too deep into the methods, just to highlight that as a tool that we used here at the Robb and Melanie Walton Preserve. The prescribed fire followed cedar thinning. In this case, we didn't have such dense stands of cedar that got cut and laid here where it became a fire issue. So we were able to use fire effectively. And again, just looking at the picture here, post-burn, you see it pretty decent light penetration, not as great as we wanted, so there will be follow-up herbicide injection that I'll get to in the next slide to thin this area out a little more. But again, you see the reduction in fuels and leaf litter and other organic material that would normally be on the floor there to keep that reduced. And allow other plants to establish forbs and other grasses. So you improve diversity there. It's good for your plant communities and good for wildlife as well. And then what's already been touched on, more frequent fires, such as on a 3 to 5 or 2 to 5 year interval, will help keep those fuels at a good level that's safe, that'll reduce your wildfire risk, and also prevents your fire from being too intense that you get too much kill through your forested landscape. So herbicide injection, also known as hack and squirt, is just that. You hack into the tree with a sharp tool, a hatchet or a machete, to get through those outer layers of the tree, the protective layers of the tree. You get into the inner soft tissue, and you squirt an herbicide into that wound that you put in the tree. There's some good information out there about how to properly do it. It's pretty low tech, but there's definitely some implementation methods to consider to do it effectively. You'll want to use an herbicide that's rated for woody species. You want something that'll translocate down into the roots and kill it in the roots. So for the implementation at the Walton Preserve, we targeted species we targeted trees that were between the range of 1 and 6 inches diameter at breast height, and it's just what it sounds. At about an average chest height, the tree would be between 1 and 6 inches of diameter. And this primarily targeted this size class that's in this mid-story range. So a lot of these trees, I'd say most of these trees within this picture were treated. So that'll help reduce the mid-story cover there to increase light penetration down to the understory, further increasing understory diversity. So in this particular case, we were a bit selective. We decided to not treat redbuds and flowering dogwoods for a couple main reasons. One being that a lot of, since those are a smaller tree, a lot of the redbuds and dogwoods would have fallen within that 1 to 6 inch diameter at breast height, and so we would have eliminated a lot of those two species. We didn't want that, and furthermore, they're aesthetically pleasing. There's trails that go through here that are publicly accessible, so we wanted to preserve the redbuds and flowering dogwoods because they're pretty, because people enjoy seeing them when they come to visit. Hack and squirt's a very cost-effective tool for forest management. It doesn't necessarily need to be implemented with prescribed fire, because oftentimes that may not be an option for many land managers to do fire in their landscape. So hack and squirt can be used without fire, and it's still quite effective at reducing your mid-story. It's more beneficial to use hack and squirt rather than just going through and cutting the trees, because a lot of the species will actually resprout and kind of work against you. Where you're trying to eliminate that woody density. If you have a bunch of resprouts from the base, it's going to be counterproductive. So that's why a hack and squirt becomes necessary when you're trying to thin your forests. So if you decide to do it yourself, like I said, there's a lot of resources out there. Various extension services throughout the United States have online publications that help kind of talk about how many cuts to make per certain diameter of tree and things like that to help effective use of this activity, as well as what type of herbicides are appropriate. And of course, always follow the label if you decide to do it yourself. And not just for your own safety, but consider water quality as well. We've been talking a lot about water quality. So make sure you're not in an area or using a chemical that's going to pollute our waterways. I'm glad Raven touched on unpaved roads. I'd also like to highlight that because as forest managers, unpaved roads are very common. One could argue essential in managed forests, but they can also pose significant ecologic and economic impacts if they're not implemented and maintained properly. So when considering new roads for a forest management, it's critical to think about placement there's also good online resources about that. At the very least, I'd like to say to not place a road down the middle of a drainage or any kind of stream or something like that. When the Nature Conservancy purchased the property, there was the network of roads, as I mentioned, and some were placed very poorly. This one in particular that you can see in the upper right-hand picture is on a steep drainage. That's basically, they put a road down a ephemeral creek, and it runs right down into Beaver Lake. So we partnered with the Beaver Watershed Alliance to pool our resources and help address this road issue so that we could keep the sediment out of our Beaver Lake. So as you can see in the picture there, that's a full-size Tundra crew cab. They could probably, most of it would fit in sections of this rill that's been carved out here from, it started off small, and we had, a series of rain events that just really opened that up and taking sediment down towards the lake. Now, it didn't dump directly into the lake, but there was a short run where if you had enough flow, it would end up in the lake, and it was causing, sedimentation down there. So we definitely wanted to address that for water quality. And this road was just, like I said, it was poorly placed and poorly constructed. So we decommissioned the road. But first we wanted to repair this section that had just washed out. So we hired a bulldozer operator to come through and fill in those deep trenches that were carved out. So this lower left picture you can see with the disturbed ground, that's post bulldozer construction. And we alleviated the steepness of some of the slope in sections where we could do that feasibly. So smoothed that all out, got a cover crop on there. You can use wheat or annual rye, those are both we found effective for going back and sowing on a disturbed road like that. It'll grow in, get some roots in there, help stabilize it in the short term, and the wheat and annual rye will run its course and die off, and then other species can come in there. If it's an actively used road, you'll want to maintain it in a way that keeps vegetation down so you can access it, but you don't want disturbed or bare disturbed soil all the time. So this bottom right-hand picture right here was taken later on in the season after our cover crop on the road had been able to take foothold. This is actually below the spot that's in the left-hand side, but looking back up. So this whole area that you see vegetated now and has leaf litter on the right side looked like this bare disturbed rocky ground prior. So you can see an accumulation of leaves and other organic material and branches that's really helpful in slowing the flow of the water there. So since this road has been decommissioned, we can just let it grow back up with woody material and hopefully not have any issues. And to this date, we haven't had any issues there. So we've cut off that source of sediment going into the lake there. So as I mentioned, with the network of roads that we have throughout the preserve, in keeping up with them, there's some best management practices or BMPs that we implemented. One really easy, low-tech BMP that we've implemented all throughout the network of roads are basically, I'll call them water bars for our intents and purposes, but think of it like a speed bump angled downslope, and it helps deflect water off of the road. So you don't get an accumulation of water on the surface, or at least such that you have a small stream running down the middle of your road, which is not ideal. It scours off your road surface and it becomes a management issue and a sedimentation issue. So those water bars spaced at appropriate distances, depending on how steep your slope is, those will help kick the water off so that it doesn't accumulate on your road surface and cause damage. These are costly and time consuming to go back and manage the road. So if you put in the right BMPs initially, it helps not only with the reduction in sediment in our waterways, but also with your time and energy, you can move on other more productive things. And then we also decommissioned several other road segments through there that were just no longer necessary. So the decommissioning allows the vegetation to grow back so it won't become a sediment issue in the future. And we can let some of that go back to a more natural look. And then I also want to just touch on, as Hugh mentioned earlier, you know, we have edge habitat, and I'm going to go a little further out into adjacent habitat, and Hugh mentioned, you know, grassland work as well. So, and just thinking about the right habitat and right place. So you may have heard the expression right tree, right place, you know, just to not to do something that's complementary to the landscape. So like you wouldn't want to have try to put a grassland on the side of one of these hill slopes that should be a forested area, or try to make a grassland along the side of a stream that should be a forested riparian area. So just thinking about the right habitat for the right place. And it makes both ecologic and economic sense too. You could spend a lot of money trying to put the wrong habitat in the wrong place and still come up unsuccessfully. So just something to think about. So in improving our adjacent habitat up here, it was a field, basically it was primarily dominated by a large thicket, like think 8 to 10 acres of solid blackberry up here, non-native blackberry. Great for birds and for people to go pick, but very low diversity through here. Fire wasn't an issue because fire wouldn't carry through a blackberry thicket. So we used careful timing of mowing, spraying, and seeding to help recover this portion of the property from the blackberry thicket to a more productive and diverse grassland setting. So my colleague had started this work before I had started managing the project, but he worked with one of our neighbors there to mow much of that, probably 6 acres of that blackberry, and treat it with an herbicide that would translocate down into the roots of the blackberry. There's, you know, pretty solid blackberry crown, especially for mature blackberry like this. So that'll help kill it and prevent it from resprouting and just retaking hold of the area. We followed up with prescribed fire as well. We burned about a 20-acre area that included, you know, 10 to 12 acres of this grassland setting. So that helped really pave the way to be able to target other non-native species, primarily tall fescue and Johnson grass in this setting. So we get the non-native species under control, which is important in a grassland and forested management type setting to keep your non-native invasive species under control. And then once we were able to get those under control here, I actually worked with Hugh. Hugh brought out a native seed drill, which was very cool to use and very effective to drill native seed over a few acres here. We've had good results. A lot of our plants have come up that we intentionally seeded. This tall bone set that you see all throughout here, we did not seed, but it was a volunteer. It was in the seed bank, but the pollinators have loved it. And we do have our other species that we've planted and seeded here coming up as well, just not as robust yet as this tall bone set. And you can see here, this was taken about a year after we did the planting. The tall bone set came up and the monarchs were visiting. This was taken in September of 2019. So the pollinators are using it. I've seen deer roaming through here as well. Turkey will utilize this and our forested area. So most of the wildlife are moving between the forested landscape and the open grassland and meadows to fulfill their needs. So it's important to think about your edge and adjacent habitats as well. So that was pretty brief, but you know, we can get into some questions. I didn't want to be too redundant with my co-panelists who covered a lot of great information as well, and that's essentially what we implemented at the Walton Preserve was, you know, thinning, fire as a tool for thinning, chemical injection, and thinning focused on red cedar where it's formed such a dense stand that it needs active management to correct. So some good resources that I'd recommend, of course, the Nature Conservancy's website. If you go to nature.org/Arkansas, that will get you to the places we protect here in Arkansas, and you can learn more about our various preserves, including the Robin Melanie Walton Preserve in Northwest Arkansas. The Arkansas Department of Agriculture's Forestry Division has some great resources online. There's a web address right there that you can find more information about. One that you may find particularly helpful is their landowner assistance section. The Forestry Division provides free technical resources for landowners, for forest landowners. And there's also a very useful directory that you can search, you can get down and search by county and different types of activities, whether it's thinning or fire. So you can use that search criteria to find local vendors and contractors that you can use if that's an option for you. So very good tool there. And then just to quickly highlight the Penn State Center for Dirt and Gravel Road Studies for more information on unpaved road best management practices. So that's their website there. A lot of good information that we've learned to implement in our unpaved roads program here in Arkansas. And that concludes, my component, but please feel free to reach out to me. I respond to Charles as well as Chaz. So there's my email and phone. So please get in touch with me if you have any questions. And thank you for your time today.
All right. Well, that was an awesome presentation, Chaz, and likewise with Raven and Hugh. If you would, if you have any questions, feel free to enter them in the Q&A box down below. We'd be happy to answer them. Can I share my screen here for a second? It's one of my favorite pictures. This was actually taken at Indian Creek. Chaz, you might recognize this. This was taken at Indian Creek in the Robin Melanie Walton Preserve. As you can see just how clear that water is because it's surrounded by all kinds of healthy forests. The Beaver Watershed Alliance also has a couple more events coming up I just wanted to talk about real quick. Thursday, September 24th from 8:30 to 11 is going to be our annual symposium. We're going to have a lot of good speakers covering a lot of good subjects there. State nutrient reduction strategy updates and the state water plan for Arkansas. Talking about the 2018 Farm Bill and some discovery farms and discovery watersheds, as well as several other interesting topics. If you would, please feel free to join us on that date. We're also going to have a no contact cleanup on the West Fork White River. We've done this for several years now, but due to recent events, we're going to be doing a no contact cleanup. So anyone in the area is also encouraged to participate in that. Once again, I'd like to thank our panelists. We'll send out a follow-up email to all of our participants giving you their contact information. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to them or to the Beaver Watershed Alliance. And I believe we are ready to wrap up. So once again, thank you everyone for attending and coming to this webinar with us. Thanks, and hope you all have a good day.